Today on Face the Nation, is the battle to reform health care over, or is it just beginning? A Washington Post poll out this morning says the nation is still deeply divided over whether the reform passed by Congress is a good thing or bad. We'll start today with two Republican firebrands, South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint and Minnesota Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann.
This has more in common with tyranny,
who are already trying to repeal the reforms. Is that even possible? And what about the violence in the wake of the congressional action? Isolated incidents or signs of a dangerous anger? We'll hear from the chairman of the Democratic Party, Tim Kaine. Then I'll have a final word on one man's plan to take the partisans out of partisan politics. But first, the aftershocks from health care reform on Face the Nation.
Face the Nation with CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Schieffer.
And good morning again. Republican Senator Jim DeMint is in his home state. He's at Greenville, South Carolina today. We start with him. Senator, good morning. Welcome to the broadcast. You said that this was going to be Barack Obama's Waterloo, and that if Republicans could defeat him on this, it would break him. Well, he won Waterloo, it looks like. So I guess my question to you is, what do you do next?
Good morning, Bob. We'll find out in November who won or lost this battle. Over 60% of Americans still want Republicans to fight to repeal this. So what I do next is I'm trying to replace those who voted for this bill. I want to repeal it, and I want to replace it with some real reform that put patients in charge of their health care again.
Well, you know, a new poll out this morning in the Washington Post does not suggest that a majority of Americans are against this, but what it does show is the country is still deeply divided. It says 46% support this, 50% oppose it. That is about the same as it was before the legislation was passed. But I guess the question I have for you is, can the president expect cooperation on anything from Republicans from here on in?
Well, the president has burned a lot of bridges on this health care reform package that he's rammed through Congress and rammed down the throats of the American people. The procedures that were used, the backroom deals, the kickbacks have created a lot of bad feelings. Now, we're still looking for ways that we can work together with the president, particularly on foreign policy and as it relates to the security of Americans. We have to keep that. But all of us who believe in freedom in this country recognize that if this health care bill stands, it'll not only destroy our health care system, we believe it'll bankrupt our country. So to give up on repealing this bill will be giving up on our country for me, and I think for millions of Americans.
Well, do you plan to do anything other than just try to defeat Democrats in November at the polls? Will there be anything between now and then, any action you will take, Senator?
Well, Bob, it's going to be important that we help people understand what this bill does. I mean, we're already getting letters from physicians who are going to take early retirement or who are no longer going to take Medicare or Medicaid. I think as people figure out that this bill cuts from Medicare and doesn't pay doctors enough to see Medicare patients, millions of the people who they say are going to get insurance are just going to be put on Medicaid. Over half the doctors already don't take Medicaid. Businesses are going to be taxed. People are going to lose their jobs. We need to help Americans understand that there's a better way to do this, but we have to begin by repealing this bill that's based on government controlling our health care. So part of what we've got to do is just make people aware of what's really going to happen over the next few years and hopefully enlist them to help us repeal it by replacing those who voted for it in November.
You know, one of the things the president said when you all said that we're going to continue to oppose this, he said, bring it on, that he was ready for the fight. And I suppose one of the ways he is doing that is he announced last night that he is going to what they call recess appoint 15 nominees for government jobs that have been appointments that are being held up in the Senate. He's going to appoint them during this recess. And for people who don't quite understand what that means, what it means is they can go to work, fill out those positions, and continue to work in those positions until the next Congress is seated next year. What's your response to that?
Well, Bob, the president is mocking Americans who continue to be against this bill, and he said bring it on, and that's what we intend to do. Now, his recess appointments belie the fact that hundreds of his nominations have been confirmed unanimously by the Senate. But he has had mixed in with these batch of nominations some pretty radical folks. Craig Becker, who was in the group that he appointed by executive fiat yesterday, is someone who's worked for unions his entire career, and he put him on a board that's supposed to be unbiased arbitrators between businesses and unions. Democrats oppose this nomination, so there's bipartisan opposition, and all we had asked for is some debate and a vote on this nominee. He decided to circumvent Congress again, which has become his style on so many issues, and just appoint him while we were out of town.
Senator, we saw some pretty scary stuff last week, both before and after this vote. We saw members' offices that were trashed. We saw death threats. We saw all kinds of things. Do you think the parties have an obligation to try to tone down some of this runaway rhetoric? Is it, in fact, dangerous?
Hey, Bob, I've been with hundreds of thousands of Tea Party patriots, and I've been with thousands of people at town halls and Washington rallies, and I've never seen any violence or heard any bad language. Now, always when you get large groups, you're going to get a few bad actors, but it's unfair and untrue to try to paint this whole American awakening with some of the bad comments that we heard last week in Washington. There's no place for violence or bad language in American politics. We settle our differences with our voices and our votes. But I do believe that it is the right and obligation of Americans, when they think the government is going in the wrong direction, to speak out and even take to the streets in nonviolent protest to let their congressmen and senators know that they don't like the way we're going. And I think that's what we're seeing, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it. But again, I encourage all Americans to do it the way we do it right in America. No violence. Just good protest if that is necessary. But let's take this to the November elections and let those people in Congress know who do you want to represent them.
All right. Senator Jim DeMint from South Carolina. Thank you so much, Senator. And now we want to go directly to Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, who joins us from her home state. She's in Minneapolis today. Congresswoman, and we used a little clip of what you said in the beginning of this. You said last week that health care reform was dangerous, and you equated it with tyranny. Do you really mean that?
I do, because now we have the federal government, Bob, taking over ownership or control of 51% of the American economy. This is stunning. Prior to September of 2008, 100% of the private economy was private. Today, the federal government has taken either direct ownership or control of banks, the largest insurance company in the United States, AIG, Freddie and Fannie. The federal government now owns, Bob, over 50% of all home mortgages. Now the direct student loan industry, Chrysler, GM, and with the healthcare industry, that's an additional 18% of the private economy, which means government would be making decisions over our lives from cradle to the grave. I think that's a stunning level of government takeover and control that we have never seen before in the history of our country.
Well, we've never seen the government the economy on a verge of total collapse. And we have to point out that a lot of this began during the Bush administration. It was President Bush who was president when the TARP law was passed to give aid to these big banks and so forth. Both people in that administration and this one would say that that staved off what could have been something like the Great Depression. You don't agree with that?
Actually, I don't agree with that, no. I voted against the $700 billion bailout, and that was really the mother of purchasing out AIG, purchasing the banks, also purchasing Freddie and Fannie, purchasing GM and Chrysler. That hasn't helped to turn our economy around. Remember, when President Obama told Congress, you have to pass my $1 trillion bailout or we could get unemployment as high as 8%. Here we are, still at 10% unemployment levels, and the administration has warned the American people, get ready, this is the new normal. We don't have to have this be the new normal, but if government persists, remember again, 51% of the economy is now under the ownership or control of the federal government. We need an exit strategy, and we need to get back to private ownership so that we can have a productive economy.
Congresswoman, I want to ask you about something that stirred up something of a controversy when you said it some time ago. You said that you thought Barack Obama had anti-American views. And just last week you said, I said, and this is a quote from you, very serious concerns that Barack Obama had anti-American views. Now I look like Nostradamus. So what do you mean the president is anti-American?
What I meant are the policies that I had just mentioned to you. I think it is very serious when the federal government directly owns car companies. That is not the American way. Or when the American economy directly owns 50% of all America's mortgages, or has direct ownership or control of the healthcare industry. Just this week, we saw American businesses announce that Obamacare will cost them $14 billion. Here in Minnesota, Medtronic announced, because of the new tax increases on medical devices, they could be looking at shedding an additional 1,000 jobs. Or 3M, it will cost them potentially $90 million in the first quarter. President Obama's own numbers, his own economic advisor, Christina Romer, said that Obamacare could cost the economy 5.5 million jobs lost. That is not going to bring us back to economic health going forward, but that's what you expect when you have massive tax increases, massive Medicare cuts, massive premium increases. You will have massive job loss.
I want to ask you about where Republicans go from here on health care reform. Sarah Palin famously said last week that it is not time for Republicans to retreat. It is time to reload. Now, she has since modified that and said she wasn't talking about guns. She was talking about getting out there and using the vote. Do you think Sarah Palin has overstated it here?
Well, I think that she's accurately saying that the Republican Party and people who are conservatives in this country and independents and disaffected Democrats want to have the federal government repeal Obamacare. And I would agree. I went to the House floor the first thing on Monday and put a bill in that would repeal Obamacare. So did other of my colleagues, Steve King of Iowa, also Parker Griffith of Alabama, and also other members as well. Jim DeMint also put in a bill to repeal Obamacare. That's what I believe the American people want us to do. And again, the New England Journal of Medicine released a survey the week that President Obama signed Obamacare, stating that over 30% of American physicians would leave the profession if the government took over health care. That's very serious going forward.
So you intend to oppose this, obviously. Do you think Republicans should cooperate with the administration on anything from here on in, or just put it all on the line here, oppose this administration, and let people settle it in November?
Well, I think that we need to repeal Obamacare, but I think we need to be all about the American people. That's why I oppose Obamacare and why I believe we must repeal it. We need to work together, whether we're Republicans, independents, Democrats. We all have to work together for whatever is in the best interest of the American people, and repeal most certainly is in the best interest of the people, because this bill will lead to economic harm if it's left in place.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman. We'll get a totally different view of all of this in 1 minute when we talk to the Democratic Party Chairman, Tim Kaine. And we're joined now by Tim Kaine, the former governor of Virginia and the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Well, I would just say to you, Governor, you heard the Republican strategy from here on in apparently is to oppose, to try to repeal health care. Do you think, in fact, that that's possible?
I think it's unwise, and I don't think it will happen, Bob. You know, one of the things I was struck in listening to Senator DeMint and Congresswoman Bachman is just the incredible anger that's there in them. And I don't think Americans are angry people. I think Americans are upbeat, optimistic, can-do people. Now, we're in a tough time, and they want to see government that is working to obtain results. But I don't think they want to see somebody who's calling the president anti-American, or a member of the Senate who says the main goal of health care should be to break the president. You know, this is about people and the problems they're experiencing. So they may want to push forward on a repeal of health care, to tell small businesses you're not going to get tax credits to pay for insurance, to tell families you now can't keep children on your policy till you're 26, to tell folks that you're now subject to these abuses of the insurance industry. I think they'd be unwise to do it, and I think the American public will reject it.
Well, what about this whole idea of this sort of runaway rhetoric? As I said to Senator DeMint, there were some kind of scary pictures that we saw on television. And I know you asked the chairman of the Republican National Committee, Michael Steele, to join with you in signing a joint letter just really calling on people to be more civil in this debate.
Bob, I think we do need to be civil. Look, one of the great things about this country is we can disagree in significant ways about important matters, but we can do it in civil and appropriate ways. And so when I saw the anger level last week, I wrote a letter to Chairman Steele and just said, hey, let's do something good. Let's join together and issue a statement calling on Americans to be civil, but also on our elected officials to model the right behavior. And it was interesting what happened. The R-N-C considered my request for 4 or 5 hours. They then called the office back to say they wouldn't sign on to the statement. And 1 minute later, they released a press statement just blasting the DNC that they sent around. We then did what we were not going to do, which we just disclosed my letter in the statement. And if you read the R-N-C's press statement and you read the very even-handed thing that I asked them to sign, you'll see that this kind of rhetoric is not only a little bit out of control, but apparently some think it's to their strategic advantage to keep people stoked.
Did you get any behind-the-scenes words from the Republicans about why they didn't want to do this? Or
what happened was they about 5 hours after we gave them the statement, and again the statement is completely even-handed. It doesn't point the fingers at any side. It just says we all ought to tone the rhetoric down. They called the office back and just said, you know, the chairman doesn't want to sign it because he thinks he's already spoken enough about this topic. But literally within a minute, the press statement was out just blasting the DNC, and they're arguing that we're trying to fan the flames. It's not the Democrats who are shouting down the president on the floor of Congress or calling names at members of Congress, you know, like baby killer or you lie. That's not what we're doing. This week you saw the Republicans say we're not going to cooperate with the president between now and the end of the year. The Dems are not saying we're not going to cooperate. We're going to keep reaching out on everything and hopefully find some common ground. But I think the other side has just adopted a strategy of complete obstruction. And, you know, even beyond health care, Bob, I think that's a loser strategy. Americans want results. That's what they want to see out of Washington. They want people to work together.
Let me just ask you about this, because you all put out a fundraising letter at the DNC. After all of this, it raised a few eyebrows because it talked about this these runaway things, these demonstrations, bricks through the windows and stuff, and then used it as part of a fundraising letter. Was that appropriate?
Well, Bob, I'll tell you why we did it. We did put out a fundraising letter referring to the bricks through the window and others, but also referring to the fact that our members who voted for health reform last Sunday are being hit by onslaughts of advertising in their districts, criticizing them, some with the most extreme language. One of my jobs as party chair is I want to be on TV thanking our members and praising them for doing an important thing for the American public. So I did. I sent out an email and I said, look, our folks are under attack who did a good thing. And I want to be able to put ads up on the air to protect them. And so, yes, we are out there vigorously promoting our members who did a very important thing for American families by enacting this reform, which will provide a path to coverage, will provide security for those with insurance, and as the CBO said, will bring health care costs down.
A lot of people are going to be watching what happens back in these congressional home districts over this Easter recess. They're talking about more demonstrations and so forth. Republicans have actually, your counterpart at the Republican National Committee, actually sent Republican members of Congress a letter of things to talk about and things to stress, the high cost of health insurance and so on and so forth. Are Democrats, did you give them talking points? What do you expect they'll be talking about?
Well, we definitely have, and at the DNC we have a wonderful organization, Organizing for America, that is grassroots volunteers in every community. They did more than 30,000 pro-healthcare reform events during this debate, and they're very active and engaged in each of these House districts. When a member will find it helpful, we're planning on doing a lot of events this week to thank members, to support them, and to put out the real facts. I was listening to Senator DeMint. He says he wants to repeal a government takeover of the health industry. Well, really what he's trying to repeal is curbs on insurance companies. We don't want insurance companies to be able to kick people off their policies when they get sick or turn you down when you try to get a new job because of a pre-existing condition. I don't know why the Republicans want to put insurance companies back in the position where they have that kind of whip hand over the American public. We want the doctors and the patients to make the decisions.
Do you have concerns about the safety of Democrats out there? Because Senator DeMint said, look, this is just the old American way. People are protesting. Yes, there are going to be some bad apples here, but this is just kind of how we do it.
Well, Bob, I think he's being disingenuous to say that, because when you, as some of the members do, say this is Armageddon, the biblical war at the end of the world, the battlefield where it takes place, you're sending a message to folks. When you're saying that, you want to target members and you have a map of the United States and you put a gun sight on members' districts, when the elected leadership feels comfortable yelling out, you lie, or baby killer, they're stoking anger and they need to stop it.
All right. Mr. Chairman,
Thanks,
thank you
Bob.
so much. Back in a moment with some final thoughts. Finally today, I am not much for radical change, but watching this toxic partisan debate over health care made me take notice of a proposal by Phil Kiesling, a former Oregon Secretary of State. Writing in the New York Times last week, he said, if we want to get serious about reducing hyper-partisanship and legislative dysfunction, then just eliminate party primary elections. As you know, most states allow political parties to hold primaries to choose their candidates. But Kiesling notes what we often overlook. Not many people vote in these primaries. In 2006, fewer than 5% voted in the New York primaries, no more than 15 to 30% in most states. In Texas this year, there was a record high primary turnout, 16.5%. What this means is that those who do vote in the primaries are the most partisan activists, the party's base, the most conservative Republicans, the most liberal Democrats. To win a primary, Democratic candidates have to move left. Republicans have to move right, which leaves the candidates stuck with positions that are less moderate than most people who vote in general elections, and worse, positions from which they can't compromise once they reach Washington. To change this, Kiesling proposes that every candidate, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, all run together in one nonpartisan primary with the top two, whatever their party, facing off in November. This wouldn't be a cure-all, but Kiesling believes it would reduce the disproportionate power the current process gives to the shrillest and most mean-spirited partisans. For sure, the result couldn't be worse than what our current system has produced. Back in a minute.